In this video, I'm going to show you a fence that wasn't really a fence at all. It was alive, it grew, it had thorns the length of your finger, it was so dense a dog couldn't squeeze through it, and it was so tough that farmers used to say it was horse high, bull strong, and pig tight. For a while, it was everywhere, wrapping around homes and farms across half the country. And then, almost overnight, we ripped it out and replaced it with something far weaker. Starting with, alright, picture this. It's the 1870s. You're walking up to a farmhouse out on the open prairie. There's no white picket fence, there's no chain link, there's no wood paneling. Instead, there's a wall of green, a living barrier of twisted branches and vicious thorns, taller than a man, so thick you literally cannot see the house through it. You can't climb it, you can't push through it, you can't even get your arm into it without coming back bleeding. And if you wanted to get to that house, you had exactly one option: walk all the way around to the gate where the people inside could see you coming. Now, here's the part that gets me. This wasn't decorative. Nobody planted this because it looked nice. They planted it because it worked, because a properly grown hedge of this stuff was one of the most effective barriers a regular family could put around their home without spending a fortune. It kept livestock in, it kept predators and intruders out, it blocked wind, it marked the boundary, and it did all of that while being, essentially, free once it was established. And if you're sitting there looking at your own yard, maybe a low wooden fence, maybe some chain link, maybe nothing at all, I want you to think about how easy it would be for someone to just walk up to your house right now. No barrier, no friction, nothing slowing anyone down. The old hedge did the opposite. It made approaching a home a deliberate, difficult, visible act. So what was this stuff? Why was it so good at the job? And why on earth did we replace it with something worse? Let's get into it. To understand the living fence, you have to go back to a time before fencing was something you bought off a shelf. For most of human history, if you wanted to enclose land, you used what the land gave you. In Britain and across Europe, this meant the hedgerow-dense lines of hawthorn, blackthorn, and other thorny shrubs, deliberately grown and shaped into barriers. Some of those European hedgerows are centuries old. They divided fields, marked property, sheltered animals, and yes, kept unwanted people and creatures out. This wasn't casual gardening, it was infrastructure. When settlers came to North America, they brought that mindset with them. But out on the American prairie, they hit a problem. There were almost no trees. The Great Plains were a vast ocean of grass, and a farmer who wanted to fence in his claim had no wood to build a rail fence and no stone to stack a wall. Hauling timber in was brutally expensive. So the question became urgent: how do you fence a farm in a place with nothing to fence it with? The answer turned out to be a tree native to a small region of the south-central United States, the Osage orange. Settlers called it hedge apple, Bois d'Arc, or just hedge. It produced these big, bumpy green fruits that nothing much wanted to eat, but the tree itself was a marvel for fencing. It grew fast, it grew dense, it was armed with stout thorns, and when you planted it in a tight row and managed it correctly, it grew together into a living wall. In the middle of the 1800s, this plant exploded across the prairie. Nurseries sold the seedlings by the millions. Entire counties were ringed in it. For a couple of decades, the Osage orange hedge was the dominant fence of the American heartland. Let me break this down, because when people hear hedge, they picture some soft little decorative shrub under a window. That's not what this was. A working defensive hedge was the product of real technique, and the farmers who grew it knew exactly what they were doing. First, the planting. You didn't just stick a few bushes in the ground and wait. The seedlings were planted in a tight, continuous line close together, sometimes just inches apart, so that, as they grew, their branches would interlock and there would be no gaps. A gap in a fence is a doorway, and the whole point was to leave no doorways. Density was everything. Then came the real trick, a technique called plashing, or hedge laying. Instead of letting the young plants grow straight up, the farmer would partially cut through each stem, near the base, not all the way, just enough to bend it over without killing it, and weave it horizontally through the row. The plant stayed alive, kept growing, and now grew sideways and upward at the same time, knitting itself into the neighboring plants. Do this along an entire line, and you get a barrier that is woven together, living and self-repairing. Damage it, and it just grows back thicker. The thorns did the rest. Osage orange thorns are no joke. Stiff, sharp, and positioned all through the branches. A barrier of interwoven thorny stems isn't something you push through. It isn't something you climb. Livestock learned fast to respect it, and so did anything or anyone thinking about crossing it uninvited. And because the root system was deep and aggressive, the hedge was anchored into the ground in a way no post and wire fence could match. You couldn't knock it down. You couldn't lift it. You couldn't cut one board and slip through. It was a structure with no single weak point. Because it wasn't built, it was grown as one continuous living thing. Here's the thing about the living fence: like every old protective system, it existed because there was a real problem that demanded a real solution. And on the frontier, the problems were stacked on top of each other. The first was livestock, both keeping yours in and keeping others out. Open range grazing meant animals wandered, and a farmer's entire livelihood could be destroyed if cattle trampled his crops or his own animals strayed and were lost. A barrier that was horse-high, bull-strong, and pig-tight solved that completely. Nothing got through, nothing got out. The second was predators and pests. A dense, thorny hedge was a serious obstacle to animals that might threaten livestock or poultry. It created a protected interior, a space that was genuinely harder for threats to penetrate. And the third, the one we care about most here, was people. On isolated farms, far from any town and far from any help, the approach to your home mattered. A living wall of thorns meant that no one could simply drift up to your house from any direction. They were funneled to the gate. They were slowed down. They were made visible. That's a real protective function, controlling and channeling how a stranger can approach your home, and buying you the seconds of warning that matter when you're on your own. The hedge didn't just mark the edge of your property. It defined the terms on which anyone could cross it. Okay, so if this living fence was cheap, tough, self-repairing, and got better with age, why did we abandon it? Why don't we see Osage orange hedges wrapped around modern homes? Honestly, a few reasons, and none of them are because the hedge stopped working. Reason 1. A single invention wiped it out almost overnight. In 1874, a man named Joseph Glidden patented a practical design for barbed wire, and barbed wire changed everything. Suddenly, you could fence an enormous amount of land in a fraction of the time, with a fraction of the labor, using cheap manufactured wire and a few posts. A hedge took years to grow into an effective barrier. Barbed wire went up in an afternoon. For a farmer trying to enclose hundreds of acres fast, that wasn't even a competition. The hedge required patience and skill. The wire required a wagon load of spools and a weekend. Reason 2. The hedge was demanding. It needed years to establish, and it needed ongoing maintenance, trimming, relaying, managing to stay effective. It took up space, throwing shade and sending roots into the field, competing with crops along its edge. As farming industrialized and every foot of ground had to pay its way, a fence that ate a strip of land and demanded skilled labor every year started to look like a liability instead of an asset. Reason 3. The whole culture of building shifted. As manufactured products took over wire, then chain link, then mass-produced wood and vinyl fencing, fencing became something you bought, installed, and forgot. It became fast, standardized, and disposable. The living fence, which was slow, local, and skill-dependent, simply didn't fit the new way of doing things. There was no company manufacturing hedges, no salesman pushing them, no building code written around them. So, quietly, the knowledge faded. The hedge-laying skill that had been passed down for generations stopped being passed down, and the great prairie hedges were bulldozed, burned, or left to grow wild and forgotten. Let's just be honest about what most of us have around our homes today. A typical residential fence, wood panel, vinyl, or chain link is not a security barrier. It's a visual marker and a pet container. That's it. A standard wooden privacy fence can be climbed by an average adult in a couple of seconds. The panels can be kicked through. The posts rot at the base and snap. Chain link is even easier. You can climb it like a ladder or cut it with a cheap tool from any hardware store. And here's the deeper issue. Most modern fencing actually works against you in one specific way. A solid privacy fence that blocks the view also blocks your view. It gives anyone who gets over it total concealment. The old hedge slowed an intruder down and kept them visible and exposed while they struggled with it. A lot of modern fencing does the opposite. It presents almost no obstacle, and once someone's past it, it hides them. There are tougher modern options: sure steel fencing, anti-climb designs, proper walls, but those are expensive, and most people don't have them. The everyday reality is that the thing around the average yard would slow a determined person down by a grand total of about 3 seconds. Compare that to a mature thorn hedge, which was a genuine, painful, time-consuming obstacle that announced your presence to everyone inside. We didn't trade up. In terms of pure barrier strength, we traded down, we just did it for speed and convenience. And most people never even noticed the trade. Here's the part that actually makes this click, and it's the same principle that shows up everywhere in good design. A built fence, wood, wire, vinyl, has discrete failure points. There's a post. There's a panel. There's a connection where the panel meets the post. Attack any one of those points, and the whole section fails. Cut one wire, kick one panel, pull one post, and you've made a hole. The barrier is only as strong as its single weakest joint, and there are joints everywhere. A living hedge has no joints. It's a continuous, distributed structure. There's no post to pull, no panel to kick, no single connection to break. Push on it, and the force spreads through a tangled mass of living, flexible, thorn branches that simply absorb it and spring back. It's the difference between a chain which fails at one link and a thicket which has no link to fail. You can hack at a hedge for an hour and make a small dent that grows back by next season. There's also the redundancy of life itself. A wooden fence is a finished object the day it's built, and from that day forward, it only decays. A hedge is the opposite. It's a system that repairs itself, thickens itself, and replaces its own damaged parts through growth. Cut a branch, and 3 grow back. Damage a section, and it heals denser than before. The old farmers didn't have a botany textbook explaining root density and self-repair and distributed load. But generations of trial and error taught them exactly what those textbooks would say. A barrier that's alive and woven together beats a barrier that's assembled from separate weak parts. So, here's the question you've been waiting for. Could you actually use a living fence today? Should you? The short answer is yes, and a quiet group of people already are. The defensive hedge is making a small comeback, not in mainstream suburbia, but among people who've thought seriously about both privacy and protection. Modern security hedging is a real thing. Landscapers and security-minded homeowners deliberately plant dense, thorny species along boundaries and under windows precisely because they create a barrier that's both beautiful and genuinely hard to get through. Plants like hawthorn, blackthorn, pyracantha, firethorn, holly, and yes, still Osage orange, are used to build living walls that funnel approach, block access, and slow anyone down exactly like the prairie hedges did. The advantages are real. A hedge is a barrier that doesn't look like a barrier, it reads as landscaping, not as a fortress, which means it protects without making your home look like a prison. It blocks wind, muffles noise, provides privacy, shelters wildlife, and gets stronger every year. The limitation is the same as it always was: time and maintenance. A hedge isn't instant. It takes years to mature into a real barrier, and it needs trimming and care to stay dense. That's the trade-off. You're trading the speed of a bought fence for a barrier that's tougher, prettier, and more permanent if you're willing to wait and tend it. Alright, let's make this practical. You don't need to ring your whole property in Osage orange to use this idea. Start small and start smart. First, think about your windows and ground floor access points. This is where the old principle is easiest to apply today. Planting a dense, thorny shrub, something like firethorn, barberry, or a tough holly under and around ground floor windows creates a genuine deterrent at exactly the spots intruders prefer. Because nobody wants to climb through a wall of thorns to reach a window. It's cheap, it looks like normal landscaping, and it quietly does real work. Second, if you've got a boundary you want to reinforce, consider a security hedge instead of, or in front of, a conventional fence. Pick a dense, thorny, appropriate species for your climate, plant it in a tight line, and commit to it. In a few years, you'll have a barrier that beats most fences on the block, and unlike that fence, it'll be improving instead of rotting. Third, if you already have a fence, combine the two. A line of thorny planting along the base or face of an existing fence adds exactly the kind of friction and discomfort that a bare fence lacks. It turns an easy climb into a painful, slow, very visible ordeal. Layering a living barrier onto a built one gives you the best of both the instant presence of the fence and the toughness of the hedge. And the longer that planting grows, the more it does the fence's job for it, until one day the fence is almost beside the point and the living wall is carrying the load entirely on its own. And finally, be patient and play the long game. The single biggest reason people skip the hedge is that it isn't instant. But a fence you buy today is at its strongest the day you install it and gets weaker forever after. A hedge you plant today is at its weakest right now and gets stronger forever after. If you plant it and tend it, the version of your home a decade from now is meaningfully harder to approach. That's a rare kind of investment. Here's what actually gets me about all of this. We live in a time where home protection has become almost entirely about detection. Cameras, doorbells that record, sensors, apps that ping your phone when someone walks up the driveway. And all of that is genuinely useful. I'm not knocking it. But notice what it does. It tells you that someone is approaching, It's about awareness after the fact. The living hedge was about something different. It was about resistance. It was about making the approach itself difficult, shaping the very ground around your home so that getting close was slow, painful, and visible. It didn't notify you that a threat had arrived. It made the threat's job harder before it ever got near. That's a fundamentally different philosophy. Prevention built into the landscape itself, rather than alerts delivered to a screen. We gained a lot in the detection era, but we quietly gave up something in the resistance era, the idea that your home surroundings could be a barrier in their own right, working silently every hour of every day. No batteries, no signal, no subscription. The good news is that nothing is stopping you from getting it back. You don't need an 1800s nursery or a lost folk skill. You just need to understand why the old hedge worked distributed strength, self-repair, thorns, and the funneling of approach, and make a few intentional choices in your own yard. The farmers who grew those prairie walls weren't behind the times. In one important way, they were ahead of ours. And the stranger who had to walk all the way around to the gate in full view of the house was proof of exactly that. Not bad for a row of trees.